we'll kick off proceedings because there's a lot of ground we want to cover. I want to thank everybody for coming, in particular the three ladies on my left. Closest to me, Pippa Hackett, obviously of the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine. She's an Offaly woman. She knows all about the industry. It is close to her heart. Senator Fiona O'Loughlin, former Mayor of Kildare, Queen of the Shannon, and running for general election in the upcoming as candidate for Fianna Fáil in Kildare South, so a constituency that's full of our industry. And you might know the lady on the far side. She's used to ride a few horses. She's now our woman in Strasbourg, Nina Carberry, MEP, elected from the Midlands Northwest. But this is not a women in politics or a women in power seminar. I would like to clarify that we did actually approach some gentlemen to join us, and for whatever reason, maybe they were trick-or-treating, but they didn't join us. Look, I think maybe this is indicative of progression. This isn't the subject on the agenda tonight. We have other milestones to cover, but we are really, truly grateful to each of you. I know how busy you are. We all know how busy you are. So to get you in one room, I think is a particular achievement on behalf of the ITBA. So with that, I'd like to introduce the chair to just basically give us the background on what came together to get tonight to happen. Kathy Grassick. Woo.
To be honest, I'm probably loud enough for everybody to hear without a microphone from my wit spotting days. Anyway, I'm just so glad to welcome so many breeders here to this industry. There's so many things on the horizon that we really need to get to grips with. And I think it's brilliant to have so many people who are involved. And it's also fantastic to have these three amazing women representing us. And as Jane said, it's a quite happy coincidence that they're all incredibly talented, extraordinary women. But they're also elected representatives who are here to liaise with us and showing us the support for our industry. So I think that's really important, and I'd really like to show my appreciation for them and hope that everybody gets something from this evening. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. And I think, look, everything that's on our agenda tonight is relevant and important to everybody in this room, whether directly and indirectly impacting our lives. So if you have a question throughout the discussion, maybe just note it down, because we will then open the questions to the floor at the end of our discussion. Look, I would just like to start light, get a little bit of background. Pippa Hackett, you are somebody who has dabbled in the industry, had a few broodmares. Just give us a little bit of background as to why it's important to you to be here.
Well, firstly, it's just an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you very much. Kathy asked me to come. I was delighted to attend. And look, Goffs, I suppose, itself holds a very special place in my heart, and it's probably my first time in stilettos in Goffs, so might well be my last. Yes. And just, I suppose, we've... myself, my husband got involved in buying foals, must be nearly 30 years now ago. Bought one, you know, for 1,400 quid and then sold it for 1,200, as you do, and then bought the next one for 1,800 and sold it for 1,600, and just kept moving along in a poor sort of way. But I suppose, you know, a couple click, and I suppose that's what we're all here for, is that the ones that work for us, especially when you're like a very small entity, as the vast majority of breeders in Ireland.
So you persevere, is what you're saying.
Persevere, yes, yeah. and hope, and learn as you go along. Don't repeat the same mistakes twice. And, you know, sometimes just things do work out, and it's something I love. I love having the horses around at home. We don't have so many at the moment. Life is too busy, but it's always been a great pleasure. And then if you happen to breed something that's, you know, special, our claim to fame was we bred a horse called Madame Trovit, who won the Flying Childers stake. Oh, I won't say how long ago.
Oh,
Flying
look at you, little sprinter, huh?
I know, and she
you know, middle distance is the core, but anyway,
I know. Well, you can't beat the old sprinters now for a bit of excitement. So just had a very lovely time at it. Met some fantastic people in thoroughbred breeders across the country. Enjoyed the sales, despite if it's cold, wet, windy. You just love it, and I think that's something. It's part of people's lives, it's part of who they are, what they do on their farms, in the same way that agriculture widely in Ireland is very much part of, you know, one's persona and one's family life, especially if it's generational. And maybe we don't say that enough in the thoroughbred sector. You see that very strongly articulated in the rest of the agri-food sector. Maybe not so much in the thoroughbred sector. Maybe that's something as breeders we could be a bit stronger about.
Well, I think we know, but maybe we don't communicate it as much. But Senator O'Loughlin, you obviously are running for re-election in Kildare South. You have, what, 3 race courses in your jurisdiction, in your county? This
yes.
must mean a lot to you.
No, absolutely. The Curragh, Naas and Punchestown. And in fact, I was in the Curragh earlier today because the IFA had a national conference. There was a distinct lack of female speakers. So
they were all here.
So when I told Minister McConaughey that this was on this evening, he was incredibly impressed. So well done. And I suppose just in terms of myself, I'm a layperson when it comes to the breeding and the horse industry, but I have a huge appreciation for it. And that actually came from somebody whose son was the first person that I met coming in, John Osborne, about, I'd say it's over 40 years ago now, when Michael Osborne came home from Lexington, and he set up a twinning between Kildare and there. And my dad was actually the chairperson of Kildare County Council, and he went out with Michael, and they started that partnership and twinning. And 30 years later, the year after my dad passed away, I had the opportunity as Mayor of Kildare to go out for the 30th anniversary celebration and to meet all the Kildare people and all the Irish people involved in the breeding and the horse industry. Was quite incredible. But on that first occasion my dad went over, I remember him coming back, and I'm from Rathangan, from an agricultural background, but the extent of the horse breeding was a pony that I had called Black Beauty. But I remember his enthusiasm, and how could I not be enthusiastic now when I see what it means to Kildare in terms of employment, in terms of tourism, the fact that we are so highly regarded right around the world. So I'm really passionate about supporting the whole industry.
I can absolutely appreciate that. So hopefully we get you into office that you'll be able to help us out a bit.
Yeah, that's it.
Nina Carberry, you don't need to give us your background. We're familiar. But what I really want to know is, what do you do when you go to Europe? Just because I'm a little bit, if I am naive to this, and I think I would reflect the wider public, when we turn on the news, we hear local news, regional politics, and then, you know, Middle Eastern, whatever. We never hear what goes on in Strasbourg, so tell us.
Okay. Do you want to have about 10 minutes?
No, you just give us the brief, and then we'll.
Right. So I'm delighted to be here this evening. It is obviously, it's an industry that's very close to my heart, and I'm in Europe now, and I think it's very valuable for us to have someone like me over there. I will give me a little bit of a background about Europe, because I know some people might know how it works and some people might not know. So there's 3 parts to the European Union. There is the Council, which is where we have Simon Harris. He goes to the council meetings with the other 27 member states, heads of state, and he has meetings there. And then we have the Commission, which we had Phil Hogan there at one stage, and then we had Mairead McGuinness, who's still there and probably until next week, when we have Michael McGrath hopefully gets picked next week as our next commissioner. And then we have the Parliament, which is me. I'm a part of the Parliament of 720 members of the European Parliament. There's 14 representatives from Ireland that go and represent Ireland in the European Parliament, and different countries have different amount of representation depending on your population at home. So Ireland has 14. And within the representation, I try to pick committees that are relevant to back home. And I'm on a committee on transport and tourism, which I think is absolutely fundamental to Ireland, especially because we are an island country. We are on the west periphery of Europe, and I think it's very important that we have, I think I'm the only full member on the committee in transport. So, but I'll just describe to you what I actually do. So
yeah, that's exactly,
within this committee, I'll pick one file, and I think it's relative to everyone that's sitting here today, which is the live animal exports file. And this file is, at the minute, has come from Commission. Let's say, like Michael McGrath, but he didn't do it, but the commissioners from Agri and Transport. So now the Parliament has it. We haven't had it on our desk yet, but I know what it involves, and there is lots of good regulation in it to do with, primarily to do with farm livestock that travels across Europe, primarily for slaughter, and there is good regulation in it. But what isn't in it is there's a few derogations that I'm very concerned about. But the exemption and derogations that is in it is training of racehorses. Training doesn't say racehorses. Competition, cultural events, circuses, equestrian sport and leisure activities.
So it says circuses but no thoroughbreds.
It doesn't say thoroughbreds necessarily. So this is a big problem. We have all these exemptions, but we don't have breeding, sales, or specifically mentioned racehorses. So this is a big problem for our industry. And my job is to make sure we get amendments on this file. So I have a big weight on my shoulders. I haven't seen the file yet. I know who the rapporteurs are, which are the people in charge of the files. I have talked to the incoming commissioners, which we'll know next week who are going to be selected. I've talked to the Agri Commissioner, who will have a big part to play on this file, and also the Transport and Tourism Commissioner, who is from Greece. I've sat down with the two of them, and I've explained the situation where the thoroughbred horse stands within this file, and I've told them the detrimental effect it would have if these regulations go through without the derogations on our sale industry and the breeding and the racehorse industry. They hadn't a clue how thoroughbreds worked. I had to explain from scratch, basically, that thoroughbreds have to cover naturally, that mares travel with their foals in a very well looked after manner in the horse boxes that we have. And to be honest, I was telling for the first time. They didn't understand. So
just before you progress, people who were bringing this legislation through the European Commission hadn't any awareness of the thoroughbred.
Now, bear in mind, these are the new commissioners coming in.
Yeah, so but it's interesting that unless you had brought your concerns to the table with your experience, that may well have come into force without it actually being spotted.
They wouldn't have known that the thoroughbred would have affected them. Okay. Because they didn't know the specific.
But given their lack of experience, and this is me being naive, given their lack of understanding, surely they can't challenge you, and this should be seamless for you, or do you have to get a majority amongst the 720 members?
So that's where I'll have to really network, Jane. Okay. So the Parliament's part to play now in this regulation. So when the time comes within my committee, Transport and Tourism, which I'll have a vote on, which is excellent for me and our industry, that when this file comes through, I'll put my amendments down. I will write a letter to the two commissioners and give my concerns again, put my amendments in, and then it's up for me to basically lobby the rest of the MEPs within my committee and try and get these amendments on board. Then it gets passed, or hopefully it gets through, and we get it to Parliament stage. And then I have another bigger task of trying to get the whole of a majority of 361 people to get this file through with those amendments in.
Wow.
So it's a big task ahead, but I think I have the knowledge behind, and I know this industry means so much to so many people at home and rural Ireland. It has a massive knock-on effect. And I have ambition. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep going.
A bit of drive about you.
A bit of a drive. But I think the help with the horse interest group I've joined recently, and I'm co-chair of that, is going to have a massive impact on that. And we have the European Horse Federation on that board as well. So I'll be working with them and getting connections with the other MEPs on that. So we have a meeting in December, and I'll be raising this again with them. So it's all about just making them aware of the situation we're in and how this can really cripple our industry if these regulations come in. But that's just a very tiny part of my job on one file. So you can understand I have to look after aviation, we have to look after marine time, we have to look after obviously.
But we're not worried about that here.
No, of course not. You don't want to hear about that. You want to hear about this particular file. But that is the part I have to play in this.
So you're busy, is what you're saying?
Pretty busy, yeah.
Yeah, well, we're very appreciative to have you there.
Yeah.
And it's actually a perfect segue to bring in this gentleman who's flown all the way back from Delmar, renowned veterinary surgeon Des Layden, because you're going to give us a background as to what Nina just alluded to there in regards new legislation that's coming up for a vote in the European Commission, and how your take on it with regards to your experience from a veterinary perspective. Des, take it away.
Delmar, and I think maybe it's a good opportunity, guys, to say we all need to recognize how critical events like the Breeders' Cup are to the welfare of our industry, and that beneath all the glitz and glamour that you're going to see on Friday night and on Saturday, there are a lot of people who've worked very hard to make that happen. Our flying grooms, the grooms who look after these horses, the shipping agents, the lorry drivers, the airline people. And I think, Madam Chairman, it's an appropriate moment for us to say thank you to all of them for what they do to make this showcase possible for all of us.
100%, yeah.
And thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. And I think we're very fortunate to have Nina as our MEP because we face a really serious issue here with the new welfare in transport regulations. As Nina has said, they're very well intended. They're aimed particularly at the transport of animals going for slaughter and young animals being transported, and we've all seen the RTE expose of calves recently. So there's a major issue there. Our problem as an industry is that we're caught up in it. Now, as Nina has said, there is an exemption from these regulations for competition horses, as she's rightly highlighted. It doesn't specify racehorses, but the reality is that racehorses have been given a derogation in a blanket term. So have the equestrian horses. Breeding has specifically not been given a derogation, specifically. And Nina is right to say this is surfacing now within the cascade between the EU Commission and the EU Council and the EU Parliament. But it started a long time ago. And our ITBA chairman, Joe Hernan, who does a wonderful job in leading the thoroughbred breeding industry in Europe, have been lobbying the EU Commission to say, we need a derogation for the thoroughbred breeding industry, the same as you have given for racing and you have given for the equestrian disciplines. And the answer has been a very firm no. What does it really mean, the absence of a derogation? Well, the first thing it means is that you can't sell horses at Goffs any longer, or at Tats, or at Arcana, because there is a stipulation that horses must be resident on any premises for 7 days before they enter it or before they leave it. And that's beyond the logistical facilities that exist in any sales complex anywhere. So our sales industry is under direct threat, and Joe Hernan has written to the Commission with copies of correspondence stating that in black and white from all of the sales companies. Not only does the lack of derogation compromise our ability to carry out sales, it compromises our ability to transport mares, again, as Nina has touched on. The specifics are that you will not be permitted to transport a mare after 80% of gestation. So for those of you who send your mares away to foaling units like Cahill's National Stud and so many others, forget it, you can't do it. You are now legally obliged to keep them at home or to have them there resident for the entirety of their pregnancy on the premises on which they're going to foal. You are not allowed to move them after they've foaled for 8 weeks. So you can kiss goodbye foal heat covering and you can kiss goodbye 28-day covers. Forget about it. You're not going to be allowed to do it. And if you cross any border within the EU, there will be compulsory unloading for inspection, regardless of whether or not There is a loading and unloading ramp at the facility. Regardless of whether you're just going from Ireland to France or France to Germany, you will be the subject of compulsory unloading, regardless of the risk and regardless of the disease hazard that is encountered there. And no animals will be permitted to undertake journeys unless there's veterinary inspection at loading and unloading. We have countered all of that in the EU Commission with DG Santi, with Dr. Gavinelli and his colleagues. We've had meetings, and Joe has written letters to them explaining exactly why this would be so dangerous to our industry. We were told, yes, it was an inadvertent oversight by the Commission, and all we had to do, not them, all we had to do was to find a legislative vehicle for them to put a derogation in place for us. So we went away and we thought about it, and we wrote back to them and we said, look, we now have the restitution of what we used to enjoy in terms of freedom of movement between Ireland and France. And it's based on a thing called Article 69, which means that you can move with relative freedom. We said, well, now, there is a legislative vehicle that we could use. So the Commission then thought about it, and their legal advisor wrote back to us and said, yes, we've looked at that. No, that can only be used as a vehicle for demonstrating freedom from infectious diseases, our nice high health breeding status that we worked so hard to get recognized. It can't be used as a guarantee of welfare in transport. They then came back to us and they said, in order to help us further, we're going to ask you 4 questions. And they wrote to Joe with these 4 questions. They said, what routes do you use to transport your breeding stock? How many movements a year do you have? What are the specifics of the vehicles that you use? So those aren't easy questions to answer, but we thought long and hard about it, and we wrote back to the Commission and said, right, in terms of the routes that we use, well, essentially, racing and breeding centres live hand in glove in all of the major racing and breeding countries of Europe. And therefore, the journeys that are undertaken by racehorses who are exempt are very similar to the routes that are used for breeding animals. They said, as we've touched on, how many movements a year? Well, that's very difficult for us to quantify. I'm sure you can appreciate how difficult that was. So what we did was, we took the EU breeding population, 35,000 mares in 2019, fallen now significantly, but we won't go into that. For our purposes, it was 35,000 mares. And so what we did was to take the global breeding statistic for the industry, which is 55%. Now, you all know we'd all be out of business if we were operating off 55% as the fertility figure. Of course it isn't, but it's the global facility figure for the industry. Therefore, if you take 35,000 and you say, okay, we're going to transport her to the stallion, we're going to transport her back, and she's not going to click the first time, so we're going to do it again and bring her back again. Now, you've got 170,000 movements. And we added in the number of movements to and from thoroughbred auction sales in the EU. Remember, we can't use the UK. And when we added all of those together, we came up with a figure of 197,000 breeding-related movements. And we said, now that's the same figure as the number of thoroughbred horse racing entries in a calendar year in Europe. And the racehorses are exempt, and we're not. So this doesn't make sense. And they then said, what guidelines do you have for transport? Now, there are guidelines for transport for racehorses, and there are guidelines for transport for the equestrian disciplines. So Joe and myself and others wrote them. We wrote a series of guidelines that are sufficiently bland that they don't impact on anything, but they talk about the quality of the vehicle, the training and awareness of the personnel, the cleanliness of the vehicle, the ability to alter its internal dimensions to make horses comfortable, and to establish and to follow all the established procedures. So we sent that back to the EU Commission. And it took them, how many weeks, Joe? 6 weeks to acknowledge the correspondence. Not to reply to it, but to acknowledge it. In the meantime, Joe, as chairman of the European Federation of Thoroughbred Breeders Associations, and myself and Paul Kahn, who represents the European and Mediterranean Horse Racing Federation, linked up with former EU Commission head of Equine in DG Sante in Brussels, and he's called Alf Fussel. Alf, in a beautifully elegant piece of choreography, is retained now, having retired from the Commission, as an external consultant on horses, and he's also retained as an external consultant by the European and Mediterranean Horse Racing Federations. So we explained where we were to Alf, and he said, I have a commission meeting with the Commission on Friday. I'll come back to you. And the advice from the Commission was nothing doing. This is a very small industry. We're looking at a much bigger picture here. We're looking at literally millions of movements of animals going for slaughter. If you're so good, why can't you just obey the rules? And we said, well, no, it's not as simple as that, and went back and explained all the problems all over again. Alf has come back to us in the meantime and said that the Commission might be prepared to consider revisiting derogation on the basis that auction sales aren't auction sales. They're exhibitions. And we don't need any of the other stipulations because we've such a vested interest in looking after our horses that we don't need European law to specify what we do and don't do. Nice idea. Is it going to happen? Well, think on. Because Nina has explained to you very nicely the cascade between the Commission and the Council of Ministers and the EU Parliament. One of the big problems with this legislation, from our point of view, is that it's already left the Council, the Commission, forgive me, it's left the Commission. It's gone to the EU Council. There will be a working group formed within the EU Council who will look at this and will look at anomalies. And then it will proceed from there, as Nina again has illustrated very nicely, to the EU Parliament. So what are the things in that cascade that are banana skins for us? The first thing is the ever-increasing interest and awareness of welfare. Why did we not get a derogation? The simple answer is because we're transporting pregnant mummies and fluffy babies. And people don't like that. And Nina's explained to you the size of the European Parliament. To have an active horse group in it is great and essential, and God knows where we'd be without it. But the fact is there are 27 member countries who don't want to see these derogations for our industry. And many of them are comparatively poorer countries in the context of our industry. And they'll say, a derogation like this is for a rich men's club. We want the same derogation to move our animals of much lesser health status, and within this room, and nobody's going to write the word down, Romania or other countries like that, where there's endemic equine infectious anemia, for example, we want the same derogations. You can't just give it to them and not give it to us. And we've also been told that the window of opportunity for sorting this out is during the current Polish presidency, which ceases in the middle of next year. And because the Poles have quite a sizable horse industry, they have a degree of sympathy for what we're talking about. The next EU presidency is Denmark. Denmark is amongst the most extreme of the welfare activist countries within the EU. And so our ability to get this transformed hinges, we are advised, in that window of opportunity between now and the middle of next year. And maybe that's given you some idea of the complexity of the issue which Joe has been chairing so ably, that we've been trying to, first of all, draw attention to, and secondly, to find a route to solving. But I can say in all honesty to everybody in this room, and again, I wouldn't want to quote it, thanks, Leo, I've never seen a greater threat to the viability of this industry, because there is very little sympathy for what we do. And we talk about it in terms of the number of jobs and the amount of turnover and everything that goes with that. And the answer is, you're in the halfpenny place here. You're a very small entity in a very big club, and this isn't our highest priority. And you go back to say, how did it happen in the first place? As we've told you, the initial advice was, this was an oversight. Just find a legislative vehicle and we'll correct that for you. When you go back a second time and you say, was it really an oversight? The advice comes back and says, no, not really. It was too complex. So that's the extent of the challenge that we are facing at the present time.
Wow.
Jane, thank you.
Thanks, Des. Thanks so much for that. And the depth of your knowledge and the way you can communicate it is, it's so articulate that it is actually frightening. And the picture that you've painted makes it, I suppose, even more appreciative to have somebody like Nina on the ground there. Without getting in further depth, that we've covered a lot of time on that subject, Nina, just could you give us what's the next step here? Timelines? We heard about the Polish presidency ending middle of next year.
It was a very good point that you made, Des. I think that's quite important because we're in the Hungarian one at the minute, and that'll finish in December. And as you have alluded to, the Polish one starts for 6 months. So I think it's vital that we act quite quickly.
Yeah.
And it all depends how it gets on in my committee and how quickly it goes through. But I'd imagine I'd say it'll probably start in December, to be honest, and we can start making amendments to it. And if that happens, then we're in the Polish presidency then. And yeah, I think we just keep on top of it and keep an eye on it. And as you said, it's important that we get it over the line before June.
Okay. Of course, yeah.
It hasn't been through the Council of Ministers yet, though.
See, I think
because if it hasn't, that's where we have an impact,
exactly.
Yeah,
certainly, as our whoever's our next ag minister.
So what happens when it releases commission? It goes to council and it comes to Parliament. We make our decision, the council makes theirs, and it comes and we have a three-party trilogue.
I think the Council of Ministers will be particularly important for this. So whoever gets elected in this next general election, and whoever the Minister for Agriculture there is, to really send that person with that particular cause. This is something that's really
another
important.
big question, Pippa. Who's going to be our Minister for Agriculture next year?
Who knows?
Well, I can assure you that Charlie
room.
McConnell will be very committed to this. But equally, when a theme or a topic comes up within the Council of Ministers, it's the Minister with the national competency. So in this case, it won't be just agriculture, it'll be the Minister for Transport as well too. So there's two key ministers that will absolutely be charged with convincing their colleagues and their compatriots right across Europe. And that's where it's at.
And that's why we
But it can be done.
Educate before we vote, and that's the only real power that we normal people have.
Well, once they're put into their positions as ministers, then you educate again if needs be. Yeah.
Well, coming back to yourself, Pippa, this country is the biggest producer of thoroughbreds in Europe. We're third in the world, only behind Australia and America. And last year we permanently exported 2,985 thoroughbreds to, I think, 37 different countries. You have had your own dialogue in the recent weeks regarding transport of thoroughbreds. Words like microchips and veterinary checks and a number of different things. I suppose it briefly appeared in the Irish field on Saturday, but to most people that was news. You and Minister Hayden facilitated a call between the department, the ITBA, Weatherby's. Can you update us on any progress that was made there?
Well, I suppose just to put it into context, really since the RTE primetime piece on the Shannon side, in abattoir in Shannon, or in Straffan, sorry, which caused it to shut down, and which caused uproar among everyone, and rightly so. It was pretty horrific what we saw, the scenes inside. On the back of that then, a new export trade really has opened up for the slaughter of animals, which sort of makes sense because these animals have to go somewhere. And on the back of that, then the department put in place new procedures as a result. But unfortunately, the department didn't consult with the people.
Yeah, was that a knee-jerk reaction off the back of?
I wouldn't say it was a knee-jerk reaction. It had to be done. We had to, the department had to put in the right procedures, but there should have been adequate consultation with the sector, with the transporters, with the breeders, with everyone who would be impacted by it, and that didn't happen. And it wasn't my call, but hands up that the department didn't do that properly. If I might say, it wouldn't have happened in any other agricultural sector. You wouldn't have had them changing any export regulations around cattle or sheep. Because
Why
they
is
would,
that?
well, it's just the size of the lobby, and you'd have the IFA jumping up and down. They have technical committees through which any changes on, any significant changes to the sector will go through, and on those committees sit farm groups, any other stakeholders who should be consulted.
So we're not loud enough?
Well, yeah, you could say that, or you need to definitely engage. But I thought we had a meeting last week. I thought it was very progressive with the ITBA, with Weatherbees Ireland, and there's connections now made. So again, whoever gets elected, and I would encourage, the ITBA and anyone who's involved in this to make connections with the relevant department officials. And they might not even be in the Department of Agriculture. It could be in the Department of Justice, for example. We've just had a gambling regulation law passed. So anything that impacts the sector, find out what department's involved with it. Make the contacts through ministers or whomever who might know, and make those contacts with those officials, because that's how that initial engagement happens. I'd like to think the department won't change something again now because of the meeting facilitated last week.
So you think that's been halted, or is it
no,
just
I wouldn't
been
say
delayed?
No, the procedures are going ahead, but now there's an opportunity there should have been opportunity before to be able to, there wasn't really difficulty with there was no discussion before, and I don't believe from the meeting last week there's any massive difficulty. It was just the nature with which it was thrust upon transporters in particular.
Okay. And what, just to my normal brain, what's the new regulation?
I'm going to ask Kathy to explain that, because
come on,
exactly
Kathy.
To my normal brain as well, and it doesn't impact me at the moment, but
this is
it's
coming
really
into force. It's going to affect everybody.
Well, it's
here.
in force at the already.
Yeah,
okay.
So it only applies to horses that are for export. It doesn't. Sorry, it doesn't apply to horses that are for import. So when you're exporting a horse, the owner or the keeper of the horse has to be registered before the horse can be exported. And also, so there'd be a change of ownership. Now, Weatherbees are going to have that facility available on site at the sale so that they can actually put in the new change of ownership. But the change of ownership, the ownership has to be up to date. And also as well, the chip has to be, and the change of ownership is to do with the chip of the horse has to be on the AIMS, or the chip checker, which is the register for.
So what happens if I buy a horse here in Goffs and I want to send it to Newmarket tomorrow?
So all of the horses, so for the sale next week, Weatherbees and Goffs and Tats Ireland had a meeting during the week, and all of the horses for the upcoming sales, it won't really affect anybody, because all of those horses will have been checked between Weatherbees and the sales company, and anybody who has a horse that isn't on that register will have been contacted and told to contact Weatherbees, and Weatherbees will put all of those horses onto the register, because there are a few horses that have escaped. Generally, any Irish-born foal is on that register. So Irish-born horses are automatically entered on that register. The only way that your horse would be on it is if it's a farm-bred horse and it wasn't registered at birth. So it will apply to a very small amount of maybe the horses in training, not so much the yearlings, but foreign-bred horses is where it's more likely to occur.
Kathy, can I ask a question? Would the census have helped that system?
Has to.
The census would, and it definitely has, but all Irish bred horses are on it. But the problem with the census system is that it doesn't actually link the name of the horse with the chip. They've just a list of microchips. So the identification form, the census isn't properly efficient. It's not done in a way. I've asked repeatedly to the department, and now I've actually got the contacts to do it properly, thanks to the meeting last week. But I had asked repeatedly with the department to actually have some conversation around the census, because the census, when you add a horse on, you add the passport number. There's no identification with that. So let's say, for example, if a horse leaves your farm, you have to go through every single passport that you have and link to find which horse links to which passport. So so if they come back and say, oh, there's a problem with this passport number, like you can imagine in a large operation how difficult it is to find out which horse that is. And when you ring them up, they can't tell you which horse it is because they haven't linked the identification to the passport number.
I don't know if anybody else is confused, but I'm lost.
So sorry. So it is actually very complicated. And the other problem with the census is that I have repeatedly tried to speak to people in the department, but the people that I had contact with previously weren't in control of doing censuses, so I didn't get to the right person. But they insisted on holding it in the middle of the December sales when over 2,500 horses were in flux and most of the people who were completing the census were in Newmarket. So we've raised that issue with them. We've highlighted it. We've asked them to reconsider when they do the census and to look at how they do the census to make it more user-friendly, because I think there's actually an added benefit to be able to do that census yourself, but to be able to identify the horses more readily on the system definitely needs improvement because it will make horses easier to track. So that's work that we're going to do.
Yeah, and in a world where we need transparency with all of our horses and where they end up and where they go, then that makes perfect sense. And they should also do it in the middle of the summer when broodmares are finished breeding and all the foals are on the ground. Like, who decided it was going to be done in December?
100%. So this new regulation really affects horses for export. So there was a lot of concern over mares coming in from England, for example, where the ownership wouldn't change and those horses were going to go back home to the people that own them and they were just going to come in for cover when they are being re-exported back to go home. So Weatherby's will assume where horses are remaining in somebody's ownership, coming in and out for breeding, they will just bring those horses over. You will just have to notify them that the horses are going back and they will just put them onto the register. So there will be, as a result of the meeting that we had, there is going to be now a way so that they can just import those horses onto the system without charging anybody, where there's no, so where horses are coming in for breeding and exporting again, there's going to be no issue. You just have to notify before they go home.
Okay.
So for farm bred horses that come in for covering, that's what you have to do.
Thanks, Jane. And will the e-passports help that situation?
No, because it's for non-Irish bred horses, so it won't. Those horses would not be on the Irish register. But the department, thanks to the meeting that we had, the Department of Agriculture took on board the fact that we are the same stud book as England and we have the same passport issuing authority. So that the understanding would be that, particularly for the English mares coming in and out, there won't be any issue. And if the ownership of the mare is not changing, there wouldn't be any charge to add her to the register. It would be just something that they would be able to do. For if you buy a horse here next week and you're asked for a change of ownership, Weatherby's will have somebody on the office. They will have somebody on site. The change of ownership can be done. Unfortunately, change of ownerships being done at the sales is going to become something that's going to be something we're all going to have to do. It is a legal requirement that change of ownerships are done for horses when they're purchased within 30 days. And there is a facility for a fine of up to €5,000 in law for not doing it. Nobody has ever been prosecuted under it, and it's never been utilised. But obviously, with the importance of traceability and compliance, that's going to be something that is there if we don't, follow suit and listen to the concerns of the department.
So has this City of Troy left the gates? There's no going back on this?
No, not on the AIMS thing. That every horse that leaves the country will have to be on the AIMS register. So if you have a farm bred horse and it's planning to leave the country, you just have to. It's very simple. It's something Weatherby's can do overnight. If the horse has changed ownership, the new owner will just.
There's no hidden cost.
The charge if there's a change of ownership is €22, which is what it's always been to do a change of ownership.
Okay. And you have to have it done 5 o'clock before. The day before.
Yeah.
You have to have it in by 5 o'clock with Weatherby's the day before they go to the port.
Yes.
So if you forget that morning, you might as well forget sending the horse.
System
and don't do it on a weekend.
Yeah, so the system updates overnight. The AIM system updates overnight. So if you haven't had it done the day before, you can't do it on the day of travel. You have to do it the 24 hours before because it takes 24 hours for that horse to appear on the register.
Okay. All right. We have a lot of ground to cover. Just don't move your horses, lads. By the sounds of it, the trading game is becoming a little bit more difficult. And there's a lot of paperwork. But anyway, I want to bring us back to the panel. Minister Hackett, you did touch on Straffan, so I may as well go there next. What happened in June shouldn't have happened. The operations were suspended subsequently, and it hasn't been open since. Can you give us some, I suppose, a progression update? Is it going to reopen? The country needs a facility.
I suppose at a very high level, without going into any specific detail, you're right. The country does need a horse abattoir, and it does need to be run in a very proper way, that's transparent, that people trust it, that the wider society trusts what's going on there. And the sector itself wants to know that their horses end up somewhere that they'll be treated and slaughtered humanely. So yes, the department is fully aware we need one. There are conversations going on about where this should be. Will it be in Straffan? I don't know. Will it be somewhere else? It could well be, but absolutely, it's something we need to get right. It's something we need here in this country, and efforts are absolutely ongoing to establish a suitable place.
And I suppose the one thing about a new government is you lose the cohesion. You know, you could have a different set of people in there and mightn't be their priority.
You won't, because the civil service or the permanent government, they never change.
Okay, so would you be confident that we'll have one?
I think it'll have to be dealt with. Otherwise, unfortunately, you might have more unforeseen consequences like this example here. So I think the sooner that this is dealt with, the better, in terms of just the wider sector and all horses, I suppose, not just thoroughbreds. But
and you, without your department hat on and your political professional outlook on life, the animal person that's in you, do you believe that in the 21st century an abattoir is the right answer? Should we be thinking bigger, broader, outside the box? Should we be thinking more veterinary protocol?
Well, that's always
the Gen
available.
Z people look at horses like they're pets now.
Well, they do, yeah. No, I think we need one. I think unless we're going to look seriously about overproduction, are we going to do that? Well, we should do at certain times, I think. We see the impacts of that on the sector directly, economically, and then you have that wider animal welfare element piece too. I mean, what are the other alternatives? Roll up to your vets, get your horse put down, and then you have to bring it to a rendering or an ackery after that. So I think the volume, where that happens,
it's the real world. Yeah,
it is the real world. But where you've dead horses and money to be made, you need to potentially create some sort of sector around that, and that's why we have abattoirs. And if they're for human consumption, that's fine. If they're not, I mean, that's one of the issues that came out in the Prime Time Investigates, that passports and microchips weren't matched, and horses were ending up in the food supply chain, and that's a whole other challenge. That's beyond animal welfare. That's human health potentially, and the lack of transparency, which freaks people out. We're back into horseburger territory.
Yeah, the one thing that got lost in the translation of the Straffan documentary on RTE was it was very good investigative journalism.
It was.
It should never have happened. And whenever a new facility does open, what regulation will be in place? Because with the department, everybody here knows that they can rock into the Irish National Stud or Joe Hernan Stud Farm unannounced and inspect. I presume the same high standards will be kept for their own.
Look, it's something that has to be examined. If the standards weren't there, they have to be improved. I mean, the regulations are there. Certain abattoirs, slaughterhouses for meat animals are department inspected. Not all. Some are under local authority, and I know that's been ironed out now at the moment. That I think essentially pretty much all of them will be under Department of Agricultural inspection. But those are the issues. Like if whatever was failing in Straffan, we need to not have that happen again. And whether it's we need cameras in all the corners, whether we need more random checks, whatever it takes, it has to be done. I think. For this viability of the sector itself, but also for that public.
To retain our social license.
Yeah, and I'm glad you've used that language, because that is exactly what it is. It's a social license to be able to do what we all love to do, and we have to be aware of that.
Industry
and we have to be aware of
on things like
and
that.
when we hear from Des's perspective around where we are at the European sense, at a European competency level, and how small that is seen in the big kettle of fish. Then we have to be really aware of that. Our social license is essential, and will become more and more important as we move on. Even though we might not like it, we might say, "Oh, these people don't understand what we do, or we don't understand how we rear our horses." That doesn't matter actually when it comes to a social license. You have to demonstrate that you are doing it to the utmost, and programs like that on the Straffan place don't do any of us any good.
No, but look, they kickstart.
They do.
Change need to happen, and change is about to happen.
Yeah.
Senator O'Loughlin, I'm going to give you a very nice nugget here.
Please do.
We're after trudging through some mud there, so I'm going to bring it back to the
thanks.
flat here. No bother, no bother. Because you're, I suppose, running for election. You're not.
As
in,
am I, but I'm
as
County
is Pippa,
Offaly,
by
I
the
know
way.
that.
We need to keep her
It's
where
all right,
she is.
not quite the horsey centre of Ireland as Kildare, but
No, what are you saying about Offaly?
You're saying you're not a biffo?
no, I'm saying not. It isn't quite the horsey centre of.
With Pippa's help, we have secured an increase in the budget, which was very welcome across the industry. I suppose my question to you is somebody who's in the heartland of it here, how important is it to you if you do get elected as a TD, if you do get into a position of influence, to build on that? Because the current government have made a lot of progress.
Yeah, no, it's hugely important. And when we look even at the figures for Kildare, for those that are involved, we've 744 breeders, we've 76 trainers, we have thousands of ancillary jobs. And so to the economy of Kildare, apart from the reputation of Kildare, the thoroughbred county, linked in now with Tipperary, of course, as the two thoroughbred counties. So where we stand in globally is hugely important. When we meet people who come to Goffs for the sales, when we meet people in Cadine when they come for the Derby, the equine tourism part of it is hugely important. And I'm a social race goer. And I think what we see during Punchestown Festival Week, what we see in Naas, and also I have to say it's wonderful to see the racetracks being used for other events, such as today with the IFA and Taste of Kildare in Naas. And we need to have the venues, I think, having multi-purpose use.
You just need to get Beyonce
at
there.
this
and
point in time. possibly I might make that too. But and I do appreciate that while those jobs are there and hugely important, that the reputation, visiting some of the stud farms, visiting some of the working farms, the pride that people take in what they're doing, the love and the passion they have for the horses that they look after is absolutely incredible. The pride, we often talk about pride of place. The pride of place that I have witnessed and seen right across the whole horse industry is incredible. And Pippa was talking earlier about the power of networking and lobbying. There's no better woman than Kathy Grassick, I can tell you that. She knows exactly who to pick up the phone to when she needs to do something.
All the numbers.
But very genuinely, this industry, and it's more than an industry, it's a vocation. It's so many people here and beyond here have spent their lives supporting the industry and being part of it. And it's not a 9-to-5 job, no more than any of ours. It's 24 hours a day at particular times. So I'm passionate about supporting it. I totally acknowledge and respect the importance of it. I see the work on an ongoing basis that Cahill does. I've often brought visitors from afar, the last one being a delegation from the Council of Europe, actually, and they were incredibly impressed with the horse experience in the National Stud. So it's part of what we are in Kildare. It's part of what we breathe. And I think that the examples and the responsibility that everybody bears in terms of trying to make sure that we keep our excellent reputation, notwithstanding the issues that have happened around in Straffan and around animal welfare. So it would be one of my top priorities.
Yeah, and look, as somebody who flies a lot, we all fly a lot. That Heathrow to Cork is full of Americans coming in from New York or whatever, and they're getting the connecting flight. And they said, any advice what you do when I go to Ireland? I said, get out of the capital. Ireland does the countryside the best. So with that in mind, when we turn on Morning Ireland or we turn on the news or whatever, everybody's agenda, number one agenda, no matter what political party you are, it's housing. Okay, affordable housing, we're not keeping up with demand, yada, yada, yada. And in the shadow of that, and I think I feel what a lot of feel the room here, and you feel the industry, is that we sometimes we get lost in translation. And the real question is, in a time when everybody's talking about urbanisation, inner city Dublin, those major projects within the capital, we feel sometimes we get a little bit lost. Is that fair?
I think it's a fair point. And sometimes I find, when you're fighting either within your parliamentary party for funding, or whether you're fighting, say, within the floor of the Seanad or the Dáil, or indeed at a committee, people have a perception, because Kildare is seen as a horsey country, that we have lots of money. And we don't. And when you break down even the average income of those that are working in the equine industry, and you mention housing, and I know that's an issue in terms of the employment for people that are in the equine industry, that with our planning laws, it can be quite difficult for the stud farms to have accommodation because of over-regulation, I would call it. So I accept what you're saying, and that's why I think it's important that we have champions within the Dáil, within the Seanad, to be able to stand up and to be able to give a voice to the industry. Hugely important.
And Pippa, you had a victory lately. Well done in getting the RVAC vaccine approved. We are leading Europe in that regard. There was a massive shortage with Artivac manufacturing not going to plan last season, so that, I suppose, we're now the envy of Europe in that regard, that we get to vaccinate against the EVA.
Yeah, listen, I think it follows on a very strong sort of pharma piece we have in Ireland. You know, we are very much leaders in those fields across, whether it's human or horses. I think that's
that was a victory for you guys, because
it
was something that needed to happen.
Well, it did need to happen. I think it's good that it did happen. I think, as Fiona says, I mean, the opportunity for any of us to sort of highlight the good things as well, and especially to the wider public. I think that's really where the crux is, you know, because we talk about budgets and, you know, okay, couple of, you know, it's 79 million, or, you know, you could say nearly 80, 79.3 million euros to the HRI this year. It's still small in the big scheme of things, but it still has to be battled for, even within a department budget, line by line. If you're taking it off there, it's going somewhere else.
You have to account for it everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah, and everywhere's pulling. Every sector is pulling. The department itself is pulling. It's pulling for IT and staff. It all comes out of the same kitty. So I think, you know, to display what the sector means. And it's not just the economic thing is essential, obviously, in the jobs it supports, but it's the wider, it's the social piece, it's the social sustainability in terms of that rural connection and people living and, you know, growing up together and maybe marrying and so forth. You know, that's important. And then there's the environmental side, which actually I think the sector doesn't maybe talk about enough. You know, it's not the same as like the dairy sector or the you know, the animal sector, where every single piece of grass is needed, you know, because it has to be eaten. You know, we have a little bit more freedom as horse owners, you know, to be maybe more champions of nature in that respect. I think there's a massive thing the sector could be doing around anthelmintic resistance. You speak to any equine vet and the issues now with horses that are not responding to their wormers, and they're really, really significant, you know. Antimicrobial resistance is massive as well, and, you know, this sector is good at that, you know, as opposed to some other elements. So I think those bits that we're strong at, we should promote. And then you look at examples like, you know, Marion in Swordlestown Little, you know, she's an ambassador for Farming for Nature, one of the first equine ones, if you like. There, it's always been sheep farmers or people from the Burren, and here we have someone in the, you know, in the middle of Kildare showing what they can do and what they can do on their farm with Horses for Nature, and there's huge opportunity there as well. So don't forget about the three sort of elements of sustainability. The economic one obviously is massive, but the rest are so important too. And I think there's something really strong in breeding horses and the sector as a whole in those all across the board. I think, look, sustainability is still the buzzword, but from Malin to Mizenhead, horses is nationwide. You know, this industry is spread across, and if we want to maintain employment all throughout this island, then this industry needs to continue to get the support that it gets, and it will continue to thrive, and we will be watching Del Mar with a hope of realistically winning the biggest race in America, and we will realistically get up, well, maybe not realistically get up at 4 o'clock in the morning to watch the Melbourne Cup, but I'll probably get it on Twitter straight away after I wake up, and hope that Willie Mullins has won it with one of his contenders. Nina, you've been busy this week. You've been across in the UK. Yeah. Tell us, what have you been doing?
Yeah, I was on a UK mission for international trade, and we were meeting with the representatives from the UK about Brexit and where we're at that.
Do they still acknowledge that B word?
They just don't want to talk about it. They just want to pull the shutter down on it and forget it even happened. But that's where we are at it. But we're at, I think, a crucial time at it. We're coming off the back of having grace, and now we're
Having a grace period, is it?
having a grace period, yes. And we're coming to the end of next year, and the TCA will be reviewed again. That's the Trade Cooperation Agreement. And then we have imminent is the Windsor Framework consent vote, which happens in Stormont. And that will be vital, how that will go. And there will be a review on that if it gets through. And hopefully it will, because I feel that things have gone well since it's been introduced up the north. So it's very, I would feel worrying. The UK don't feel worried about it, but I would feel a little bit worried about how the discussions will go. EU probably won't bend on anything to do with the single market or customs union, and it will be tricky time. I think it will.
As somebody who's obviously, you're on the periphery, but you're much closer to it than us, do you feel the UK, considering they only produce actually half the number of thoroughbreds that we produce in a year, and given their land area, that's quite significant, is there influence within offices, within powerful offices? Is that lax? Are they losing influence where they need it?
I just think
they being obviously the industry.
They've just moved. Are you talking about the equine industry or
in the UK? Yeah.
Yeah, they weren't really talking about the equine industry, to be honest, Jane, over there. I bring it up, but they were very quickly going over it. You know, they didn't really have that priority.
And if we get past the grace period and there's no agreement, what happens?
I honestly don't know. I hope we come to agreement, because we do not want to see friction in the north. And I think everyone wants that. But I feel we need to make sure the UK has the priority for Northern Ireland, because it is quite scary if we don't come to an agreement. Because the UK has standards. They won't drop. But the UK is going to have to bend to meet the EU standards. And Northern Ireland is caught in the middle of it with no representation.
Wow.
And it's quite scary.
And it's with just again naive question: are Northern Ireland aware of this problem?
Oh, they absolutely are.
Do they have a seat at the table? Is what I'm asking.
No, they don't.
So they have no voice.
Well, like I'm on the border counties. I'm representing Midlands Northwest. Myself and Barry Cameron were over there, and we were quite shocked that that they're on their own and they're dependent on us to fight for them, because we're the only ones in the Parliament that can actually fight for them. So they're begging us to give. Obviously, they're lobbying us to tell them what to say, and it's up to us really to fight their corner for them.
Okay.
But I just must say, I actually want to go back to people championing. I think Martin Hayden played a big part of Brexit and getting the vet bonds removed for breeding, the breeding sector. I thought that was a massive, massive part that Martin Hayden had played back then. Yeah. And to be fair to Martin, he has been championing the equine industry for a long time, and especially over the last number of weeks of making sure that we secured the funding as well. So I think we must realise what Martin has done in the last number of years for
He's
the
been a great voice to have, absolutely. Minister Hackett, on a different note, the gambling regulation bill has, pun very much intended, cleared all of the hurdles. Bar President Higgins signing it into law. It's basically into the final furlong. What is the timeline we're looking at now? It's going to come into force, and how do you see it affecting the industry?
I think, look, whenever President Higgins signs it, then there's the next stage is that it becomes commenced. So whatever minister, I mean, at this stage it's not going to commence before the end of this term. So the next minister will commence it, and that's up to them. But that's when it'll happen. That'll be the Justice Minister. I mean, I think the impact, and I know it was a sensitive piece of legislation, but again, it's being done for the right reasons, because as somebody who is married to a bookmaker's son, you can see the difficulty with gambling, and I think again it's an area the sector has to be completely aware of. That social license piece is massive, and I think from my perspective as a horse breeder, former horse breeder, I mean, I was doing it for the breeding of the horses, for the selling at the sales, for hopefully turning a few quid, enjoying watching them race, and that's fine. And I respect that the gambling piece comes on top of that, but it has to be able to. The sector has to be able to exist not with maybe so much of that on top, because I fear for I fear for where it'll go. We see the challenges around, you know, the greyhound racing sector. I don't really want to make comparisons, but this is the way things are going. This is the way people view certain things, and gambling is a huge, huge problem for so many people. It's like life destroying, and I think that's where it's coming from. It's protecting younger people, essentially, protecting more vulnerable people from advertising, and I suppose that's it in a nutshell. But it was a massively challenging piece of legislation to be brought through.
Well, the previous legislation, or the one that is in existence today, is over 50 years old. I don't think anybody in the industry challenged that it needed to be reformed. And with the digital age evolving as it is, I don't even think this current piece of legislation going forward in 10 years' time may well be out of date. But the question was, with a major piece of legislation that was quite intricate, how long does it realistically take to come into force?
Well, it depends when it's commenced, and I don't know. You'll have to ask the next Minister for Justice that. But what I will say is it might, again, be an example of where maybe not enough early engagement took place when this was getting developed, when it was getting drafted, when the heads of the bill were being put together from the sector with the relevant ministers. And there, again, it's important to have those connections in the departments. Not necessarily the relevant minister, it could be the officials. So the Department of Justice potentially is another department that this sector should have links with. Know who's the PO.
Learning lessons the hard way.
But that's it. Well, maybe until, you know, but it's all learning. Every day is a learning day, but make the connections, have those people. Hey, what's going on with this? I've heard there's this bill going on. What does it mean?
Don't be reactionary, be proactive.
I think so. Yeah, I'm not saying it mightn't have changed too much of it, but at least you'd have been, you know, the sector might have been a little bit more aware of what was coming up at them, and I think that's important for the future. Just be maybe a bit more hands-on if you can, or develop the relationships so you can know what's coming at you, so you can put in places, so we won't have an incident, you know, we won't have regulations changed on us without knowing, and without the ability to inform those who are going to be impacted by it. So, but as to the when, I don't know. Do you
mind me asking, was there much of debate in the Dáil on it?
There was a good bit, and in the Shannon,
And how long does that last for? Like,
it can last for weeks. I mean, being in the committee before that, I mean, the process, I think it was fairly lengthy because there was a lot of pressure on. I mean, you were all getting the letters, and we were, so.
And there was a lot of engagement, in fairness, and there was some amendments tabled that were accepted at Shannon's stage as well too.
Sort of soften the blow a bit.
Yeah, so in fact, in terms of pieces of legislation, I would say that there was quite a lot of engagement throughout the whole process.
Okay. Anyway, as we said, it'll be crossing the line imminently. Senator O'Loughlin, yourself, you are, again, I go back to your jurisdiction, but Ireland produces around 10,000 foals a year. We're a small island. I think 5.2 million is our current population. Like, that is, I think, per person, that's the biggest in the world.
It's nearly a leg per person,
yeah,
is it?
Well,
that out.
First time I've heard of per capita.
we punch.
In relation to foal producing, yeah.
There's 6,000 registered breeders in this country. There's 731 of them in your county.
Yeah.
One of the biggest challenges for the industry that has been growing over the past decade, and it has affected, I'd say, everybody in this room, is trying to recruit skilled labour. Employment, you know, people talk about unemployment. This industry can't get enough people to do, and it is intricate work. We look at the television, you can see it in the pictures, people riding the horses. It takes skilled labour to bring a horse into this world. It takes skilled labour to work with young stock all the way through the cycle. If you were in a position of influence, how would you help the industry in this regard?
Yeah, and as you say, it is very specialised work. Well, I'm my party spokesperson in education, and education comes into absolutely everything. So even in terms of apprenticeships, for example, I think that there would be room for an apprenticeship based around the whole equestrian area, equestrian skills. And we've had a number of new skills added to the apprenticeships over the last number of years. And I think it's time to have one around the whole equestrian area.
Naturally, you'd have one of those in race.
Yeah.
And race has been in the headlines for the wrong reasons lately.
Has.
So how could we propose having a new apprenticeship when our academy has been under threat?
Well, I think that a lot of work needs to be put in place to get race back to where it was. And you know, there are different reasons why race is where it's at this point, but I think it absolutely needs to be a priority. And I feel that as well as the industry, the state needs to be involved in ensuring that we have that up and running. But I think that there is room for other types of apprenticeships as well too within the industry, because we have so much excellence within it. So many, I think, that would be prepared to be part of an apprenticeship program, and for young people then to earn as they learn and have the opportunity to have the certification going forward. I also think that while in a country where we have such high employment at the moment, sometimes it's hard to attract people. And obviously this isn't just an ordinary job. You have to have the passion, the interest, and all of that as well too. But we certainly, I think, need to have more work permits from abroad. And I know that some of them come in earlier this year than before, but we need to have more. And I understand too that there's only some specific areas of the equine industry
that were gained for racehorse trainers, but not for stud farms.
Around stud farms, and they absolutely should be. And that's something that I certainly will take up with Dara Cleary, who is my colleague, and he works in this area in relation to that, to the department.
Okay, well, that is something I think that a lot of people would appreciate, because it's a growing issue, and I think it's something that has been a conversation for quite a while. I
suppose with the caveat, and I'm not really cutting across you, Fiona.
I saw you writing profusely.
I was no, just
can't read it though.
No, sorry, I can hardly read it myself. But just there was concern, maybe in this sector as well, but also in sectors like the horticulture sector, you know, who do rely on work permits to support the jobs that are done. There was a concern around permit wage increases, which would have created a sort of a two-tier payment, but it's under review at the moment, so that's getting looked at, because it was going to create anyone who came in a work permit was actually going to get potentially paid more than somebody doing the same job who was already here doing it.
Yes. Yeah, this was just with the rise.
But I can already see the tables being turned upside down.
Yeah, so I mean, but again, the sense in that was that you know, if we are bringing people in here to work, we have to pay them.
It was to make sure that they wouldn't be exploited, because that had happened in the past.
And this is again maybe unintended consequences of maybe poor, not from our sector, from other sectors.
It's a crisis in a lot of industries, to be honest. It's a crisis across Europe as well. I only spoke about it in the Parliament. Skills shortage everywhere around Europe for anything, labour, anything, houses, infrastructure. We're lacking for renewable energy. Where do we get all our skilled work? Like, it's just impossible.
But we only have to fight our corner.
I know, so I understand, but we're up against it.
We can only put out one fire. So I hear you, and I see in other industries as well. Look, the demand for certain services, and particularly building, people can't keep up with it. People can't actually build them as quick as they need to be built. So
we have to probably look after the people we have, because it's vital that they stay in the industry.
Just to make a quick point, because it's something that I've seen happening in the Curragh in particular, and Evan Arkwright has done absolutely super work in terms of bringing schools in at different stages and showing them all of the different elements of the equine industry. And then a lot of the stud farms opening their doors publicly and having those visitation days. I think that's really important in terms of encouraging young people into the industry and to see what it's all about. Because sometimes, if you're not involved, if you don't grow up in a family that is maybe involved, there can be a bit of mystique about it. But when you break down that mystique, there isn't, and you just really get to see what it's like, and that there's huge opportunities.
I think everybody's making an effort, because we know that is such an important thing going forward, to keep, not only for an employment perspective, but to keep engagement with these, because we want them watching Sally Ann on ITV, and we want them coming to the stud farms, we want them coming to the races. So naturally that's it.
And the skills are massive. I mean, I came from like a show jumping background, and I did my apprenticeship with Gay O'Callaghan and Emer Mulhern, you know, to get into the thoroughbred side of it.
Is that why you got out of it and went to the dog? No. It was easier.
No, but I mean, the thing was, it was a different set of skills, and I was horsey, you know.
Is it any wonder you're able for them?
But I have great, you know, I have huge admiration for somebody who goes into a sector like this with like zero experience with horses.
Did it,
well, like exactly. Well, there you go. But it's amazing, you know. So hats off to them, because it's amazing, you know.
But it is very rewarding work.
And it is. It's fabulous.
We can talk about it all day, but ultimately, I see it from a home perspective. my parents' generation are getting older and the numbers coming along aren't maybe as interested, or maybe they're going to do it part-time, a little bit like the IFA are probably seeing with farmers. People are going to subsidise their income and not just rely on dairy anymore. But anyway, we could go down a complete rabbit hole. Nina Carberry, easy question. What is the biggest, in your opinion, the biggest challenge facing the industry in the next 10 years?
It's itself, I think. It's the end of life for horses.
Okay.
That's, for me, it's the biggest issue we have to clean up, and we have to be serious about it. It's the elephant in the room. No one really wants to talk about it, but it is the reality of the industry, what it's facing.
So the life cycle of the horse.
Oh, like the end of life. It's making sure that we don't see what happened during the summer, and I have to applaud RTE for doing what they done, because we wouldn't have known. How would we have known?
Naturally, we'd be still happening, yeah.
So I do believe that social license is a massive player in this. They do choose, and we've seen what happened with RTE. We've seen what they've done. I don't know how many people have the license here now, the RTE license. But to be honest, we have a big part to play, and I feel that it should be, I think we all should pay into a fund that should help us pay, like that it shouldn't be...
We all being horse owners, is it, or breeders? Or
I feel that stallions have a part to play. I think we all have to pay a levy.
Okay.
That's what I feel. This is my little...
Ideal world, yeah.
Yeah. Stallions have a part to play, breeders have a part to play, jockeys, trainers, owners, everyone. And we put in a fund. It's not going to hurt everyone by too much, but I feel that the horse should be brought to a veterinarian, your local veterinarian that you use, be brought there, put down humanely in a proper way, controlled manner, environment. And at the minute, we don't have an abattoir. We use the kennels. And that's, for me, until we get sorted with an abattoir that's running that the way...
Even that word.
It's awful, yeah.
It's an awful... For somebody within the industry, it's awful. Can you imagine just from...
But I think we have a massive part to play ourselves, and I think there should be something looked into a fund like that. We have an Inter-Jockeys fund, we have other types of funds. I can't see why we can't have a fund for this, and we should all chip in.
Okay, well, that's an interesting take, and I know John Osborne is here from HRI, and he's... keeping his head down, but I'm sure the thought has crossed his mind. I was going to ask Senator O'Loughlin and Minister Hackett, because you're both canvassing at the moment, you're both going for re-election, when you go door to door, what the people's concerns are. But you know what? The people are here, so we can ask them.
Yeah, sure.
So that's a good idea.
Get ready. We have a microphone out there. I hope we have a few questions, because that is the end of what I had to ask the panel. So now it's over to you guys. Take it away.
Thanks, Jane.
We have a hand up. This is a promising start.
I would just like to ask the panel, is there any hope of a Buy Irish campaign? I know we're in Europe, but some different sectors seem to be able to promote buying Irish. But as a small breeder, I'm sick of being, in the past at meetings like this, where one time the then ambassador for Irish horses was telling us that the owners were too spoiled to have the patience to wait for Irish horses. And it's getting very serious. I think the last year has been harder in my maybe 25, 30 years as a small breeder. Things have got worse. And I thank every day that I've a good day job.
Okay, so the question is exactly which now?
A campaign to
buy Irish.
To buy Irish horses.
Okay.
Can we do that, or are we snookered by being in Europe, not promoting just Irish horses?
I'm just trying to get, the question. So we want to promote Buy Irish in Europe, something similar to the PGI, like what we have in like a label.
Well, to a certain degree, ITM do endorse the Irish Thoroughbred quite well.
Yeah, they're the best in the world. It's not hard to sell them.
No, but
as a small breeder, it can be a bit of a challenge.
Competition is high, and I suppose at the moment it's all about demand and supply. We're having a reduction in our foal numbers at the moment, which will obviously contract supply, but we need to maintain demand. Are you national hunter flat breeder?
National hunter.
See, I see exactly where you're coming from. The demand is high in France and it's low in Ireland.
Can I just ask, and apologies, maybe I should know this and I can't remember because I've been out of it a bit too long. I mean, the French do the French breeders premium. They encourage French, people to buy those horses, and leave them in France. Yeah, well, okay, fair enough, and it's a big enough country to hold them, and we can't have that on every horse here. But I mean, we did have remember we did the sort of bonus scheme if you bought an Irish. Yes, is that still a thing?
That's still there.
Okay,
and the ITBA filly scheme.
Okay, so there are a few schemes to sort of support the breeders.
It's definitely helped the mares as well, and the fillies have a price at the sales now, to be honest.
They have a value.
Has helped a lot.
The average in the last 10 years, the average for fillies in that sale has gone from 14 to 41, and the median has gone from, I think it was about 9 to 46.
But we do have a different model here going to the sales. Like we nearly sell for the sales ring, and the French sale for a race.
Yeah, that's a whole
totally
other seminar.
Model.
That is,
totally
without being dismissive of the question.
That is an issue.
That is
a big issue.
Definitely on the minds of every national breeder, myself included. But I think
we've seen it at the foal sales. Like
we're going to be coming here in December. We're going to be going to Tats in November.
It's a big problem.
There's definitely been done a lot of work with HRI are looking at bringing in a 3-year-old race program, which should help encourage the way that Irish horses are produced.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a 2-year-old section to the Derby sale as well, which should encourage more people to try and produce more precocious horses.
Yeah, I think
fall in line with what the French are doing.
I think growing up, we were the premium brand. We were Chanel, and somewhere in the last decade, we've been passed, and we're River Island at the moment, and that's because we have won Ballyburn. We have won Ballyburn, and they've had 9 of the top 10 earning jump horses in the last season. And that we have to ask the question, why is that? We asked the question at an ITBA seminar last summer, and that was concluded that we're not getting started early enough, and it'll take time to evolve. But I applaud HRI for bringing in this 3-year-old hurdle series. It hasn't actually been announced yet, but I hope it's imminent, because we need to catch up. We're Emerald Isle.
Would I be wrong in saying that the French concentrate on the mares rather than the stallions? Correct,
and they have bigger diversity of bloodlines, which don't inbreed, guys. I've gone through the National Hunt Tatterstall's foal catalogue, and it's around 17% inbred in the first 4 generations. But as I said, this is a whole other seminar. Yeah. We might move on to another question, because we have very influential people here in politics, and we might just pick their brains while we have them. Does anybody else have a question? There's a hand down there, Connor.
Thanks. It's probably one for Minister Hackett. Do you think the equine industry will face a similar chain of custody, similar to those in place for bovines and ovines? And if so, when?
In terms of traceability and
ownership movements.
I mean, it's probably moving towards that. I mean, even the requirement to indicate exporting and the change of ownership very soon now, literally the same day. I think there will be. I mean, there's a whole heap of horses we don't know where they are, and the census does one part of it. I think what the challenge with it mainly is there's not enough sort of communication. Like the department have its census. We know that Weatherby's managed the stud book for that. We know Sport Horse Ireland, another branch that manages sport horses, and they're all sort of doing a similar thing, but not too much contact. So cross-pollination, and I think we just need a little bit more joined-up thinking in regard to how we do that. But I think we should know where horses are. I mean, the difference between horses and bovines and ovines, etc., is that once you're talking about food, that's a whole different kettle of fish. The sheep are different. Sheep are only census. We don't know where every sheep is at any one time. We know where every cow and cattle is. Yeah.
So it probably is.
I'd say it's imminent at some stage. I think so. It's going to be part and parcel of the whole transparency. But I mean, it should be easily enough done in this sector because everything is essentially, well, we hope, is microchipped and passported early on and genotyped. We know we have that. And then it's just about saying where the animal is. I think there's other horses that will be more challenged by that, yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Interesting. Thanks, Connor. Anybody else got a question for our panelists? We have a hand here.
Sorry, I would just like to say, you say there's skill shortage in the industry. But when you look at the industry, I mean, the people, the wages are very low, the hours are long, there's a lot of abuse in the system, and there is, I don't know what can be done to sort of improve the standards for the people that come into the industry. Any comment on that and how it can be improved?
For any particular panelist?
No, just a general question of how you can see that you want to bring people into the industry, but as I say, the hours are long, the wages are poor.
Well, I think we'll have all of a say on this.
Health and safety is a big issue, and it doesn't seem to be a lot done there.
I might contest without actually having the numbers of the average wage, but if you want to get good staff in this industry, you have to compete.
Yeah.
And naturally you have to compete with conditions, and I think the conditions, personal experience, and from what I can see from a lot of my friends who are employed in the industry, have improved markedly in the last 5, 6, 7 years. And I think if we're an industry that wants to retain and attract good staff, we have to continue to increase the conditions of the staff. Now, it is physical labour. I'm not going to dispute this. Yeah. It's very rewarding, as I said, but I wouldn't take it as negatively as maybe the question is portrayed, but I'll ask my panelists the same question.
I think we're not doing too bad in how we what the rate they're getting, but I feel that it is hard work, but we do have to think of the employers as well. I know a lot of them can afford good staff and whatever, but there's other employers that are under pressure. There's the increase in wages, and then you have the increase of all the other, like hay, shavings. There's a lot. I've had it myself.
Same with every business,
It's the same with every business, the overheads. But I do think we are way ahead of the UK on this as well. Like, they just don't seem to pay their staff over there. So I think we're winning in that regard. But we do have to go. We do have to go a bit more. But yeah, it's all about, as I said, we have to look after what we have at the minute and nurture what we have, because they're highly skilled people that it's very hard to get. And they do have to be looked after, I would agree.
They are, but I don't think the training systems are in place there. They'll just bring people who love horses, and they'll bring them onto a stud farm or a race, and they'll just put them straight into it, and there won't be a lot of training, and they have to sink or swim.
That's a very broad brushstroke you're using there now. I'd contest that. There's a trainer sitting behind you there, and he's an absolute gentleman, and I wouldn't say if I couldn't ride a horse that he'd put me up on a horse until I could. So look, that's just my contest to that.
Yeah, I just think the hours are long. It's
but again, the hours are long. I would contest that. Some people only work in the morning. Some people work a couple of hours in the afternoon. Some people work part-time. Some people. That's again, it's not a one stroke for all. I personally don't think.
But I think if you want to attract people into it and make it more professional, you've got to provide better training and to actually attract people into it.
Senator O'Loughlin was alluding to there, that if we got race back up and running, that we could attract through an apprenticeship program and educate and inform that way.
And there has been coaches introduced for bringing on jockeys as well. So if you're talking about that side of things as well, there is coaches that have been employed to help those jockeys as well.
Yeah, and I do think you have to look at it in the whole, and the cost of business certainly has gone up, so we have to support those in the industry to make it viable for them. But I do take your point, and we do need to look after the welfare of people who are working in the industry. But I'm just remembering being in Dermot Wells Yard one time, probably about 5 years ago, and legislation had been brought in terms of the hours that the stable staff could work. And it was actually causing a problem, and it was the stable staff themselves were talking about it, because it meant they had to spread the hours out over 7 days as opposed to being able to do it all in 5 days. And they felt it suited not just themselves, but it suited the horses that they were working with better as well too. So there's always unintended consequences. So if you're going to legislate for something, again, it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about that consultation with everybody that's working within the industry to try to make sure that everybody is supported in as far as possible. And I really would think those that are in the industry and want to support it want to have, going back to your point, Jane, people who care about what they're doing, want to support them, want to keep them as well too, because there's so many jobs out there. So I think the market conditions themselves are actually going to dictate better conditions and better pay.
Look, we can always do things better, and I think if there is opportunity to improve training, education, then we should embrace it. And I think there are, we've seen a few examples tonight of where there are opportunities, whether it's apprenticeships. As I said, I certainly learned fairly quickly in my past how to do things right, and conditions even at that stage weren't even too bad, and that's going back a fair few decades at this stage. But I think one of the things that, and it probably is still the case, which a lot of jobs don't come with, that a lot of the stud farm jobs come with accommodation. Well, they certainly did anyway, and not always, but that's a massive element of any job nowadays, particularly with the challenges. But certainly, I think if there is improvements to be made, we should always listen and see where we can make them, whether it's wages, conditions, training. Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, Jane, I'd just like to respond there as well. I would have to say from an ITBA perspective that we do provide an awful lot of education and training, particularly in the areas of things like first aid, health and safety. There are courses on non-stop throughout the year. We do provide and equip as well through HRI. And there are courses still ongoing. Even at race at the moment, there was actually a junior skills camp over the last few days, which I don't know if you've seen any footage from. It was just absolutely wonderful to see pony club age kids going down and experiencing, what it was like to learn to be a jockey. And I think, when you look at courses like the Irish National Stud course that we have, and a lot of the courses, in Kildalton and places like that, we do have actually, great headway has been made there. Even our own internship, this year we did a junior internship for fourth year students, and we actually did a skills handling session and a health and safety day, and they were given training so that if they were going on to do work experience as fourth years, that we knew that if we were linking them up with a stud farm in their area, that they had actually weren't going in unskilled or untrained, and that farms could have a bit of confidence in giving these kids some work experience. Yeah. So we are very aware of it, and we're going to be continuing to keep education as a high priority. Yeah. To this gentleman's point, perhaps as an industry we have had a poor reputation in this area, but even without the apprenticeships as that were alluded to and the programs that are already up and running, number one, maybe we're not communicating that they're available to most people, and two, don't underestimate the apprenticeship that you have when you work for your employer. And there are fantastic horsemen and women around the country that will teach you that they don't have a diploma, but they have a degree in life, and that is something that you can't get in a college boardroom or a lecture hall. But anyway, that's that question. Is there anything else before we conclude? There's a hand over here, Regina.
You mentioned earlier there's a couple of things went through the Dáil, like the gambling bill and like the change of ownership bill. They went through the Dáil without us ever knowing. And you mentioned about committees, that how do we get ourselves on those committees? Like you say, the IFA would be shouting and roaring if they. How come we let it get so far? Like, we didn't hear about the gambling until it was practically gone through the Dáil, the rest of the industry. I'm wondering how, or is there an onus on us to put ourselves on these committees, or is there an onus on ye as our representative people on the ground to inform us that this is happening? Like, where we wouldn't have as big a lobbying group as the IFA, but we'd like to know how we could, maybe be on the front foot, not on the back foot all the time.
That's a great question.
I think that's an excellent question, and the committees that we're talking about are actually Oireachtas committees, so you have to be a member of the Oireachtas to be on them. So basically, there's up to 15 Oireachtas members on them. They're called joint committees, so you have members from the Dáil and from the Seanad. But how somebody who has an expertise like yourself, we have situations where people are invited in as witnesses. So there is a chair of each of the committees. So generally speaking, what will happen is then interest groups will write in and they'll request an opportunity to come before the committee. So the committees do two things essentially. They examine legislation, draft legislation, and make recommendations. And what's really good about the committees is it's generally not split among party lines, that quite often there is consensus across the board, and there can be the opportunity to amend legislation at that point in time. But also, apart from legislation, there is, because the committees meet every single week, so there's often the opportunity to talk about other issues that are not under or due for legislation at that point in time, but maybe down the line. And maybe the interest group may be looking for the Oireachtas committee to do a report on a specific thing. So it is quite an influential way, but I absolutely take your point that sometimes it's hard to know. And you know, it probably takes all of us a while to figure out how it works when we're elected ourselves, to be honest. And what happens then is on specific things, so I'm a member of 3 committees, but there have been times on the Agricultural Committee that I wanted to come in and speak about, and I did recently actually, around racing. And so I will organise then with a colleague that I can substitute formally for them and go in and make my points. But there's probably a lot more that we can do as Oireachtas members to let people know the schedule that's coming up. I generally send out an e-letter to, if you want to sign up for it, but I have all the different pieces of legislation that are coming up and items that are coming up on my own committees, not necessarily all of them. But it's a point, it's something we need to take on board.
Yeah, actually, just for a simplistic point of view, is there a liaison that somebody like the ITBA, one person, could just be kept informed? Because we have, I suppose, the hare has left the traps on a couple of occasions on us now. We don't want to let that happen again. And we live in a world where we're constantly getting information. I actually made this point to Nina before. I don't know what's going on in Europe because I'm being bombarded with what's going on in Lebanon and Gaza and Israel and anything that's happening domestically. And it's a small thing, but I'm not saying there needs to be a liaison there, but if there was a point of contact for the ITBA or for the industry groups.
Yeah, I think that's certainly something that we could do. Generally speaking, what would happen is then the liaison person more than likely would be a member of, say, the political parties, as opposed to, because there wouldn't be an Oireachtas liaison person within, say, the Secretariat that is going to write out to people, unless there is a request that comes in from a member that, say, the ITBA should be invited or should be consulted with, and then the Secretariat of that committee will do it. But I think what we need is an ongoing, in terms of all the different pieces of legislation that are coming through that may have unintended consequences. And I think that's something we need to take up within our own political parties, and something that's definitely worth doing.
If there's anything we learned tonight, it's the importance of communication and dialogue.
I think it's the most important thing.
Because what you guys discuss, your day-to-day jobs, impact everybody. And I'm not talking about the room. I'm talking about the 35,000 people who get out of bed in the morning to work in this industry.
Well, I just want to go back to, I suppose, when I first got elected, I met John Osborne and Suzanne Aid, and they brought me, we went through this regulation, and it was my beeline to go and get on the Transport Tourism Committee, and then it's up to me then to relate back. So I would think it's my responsibility as elected representative to inform my own constituency and to make sure that you're all up to date. And that's why I'm particularly here, to make sure that you know what I'm up to, and then to keep you up to date. I would have thought that was my job. But there's other stuff that you probably won't need to be updated on. You don't really need to know what about the flight paths in Dublin, so I'll be informing someone else about that, or you know what I mean? So I think we've got a big part to play in that, and to communicate back, and that's my feeling. But
and sometimes we find out from people in the sector.
That's true.
And they flag it with us. They'll say,
yeah, that's true too.
Somebody told me there's something going on about, exactly.
Yeah,
and
my Greek man,
But it's exactly that. So actually it is two-way, but I think the onus is ultimately on the political people who...
Your representative,
Well, yes, and who have an interest in it. You might know, as you say, I mean, that's one bit of what all of us do, and, you know, it's not my line ministry, the horse sector or any of those, but only because I'm interested genuinely and passionate about it and from it. Kathy rang me 10 days ago and said, look, what are we going to do about this? And I said, well, let's have a meeting about it. So we did, and we got the officials around the room,
very lucky to
all
have
the way
that
up
dialogue,
to the chief veterinary officer. So I mean, that's now open now. That wasn't there before. So it's just about asking.
How the IFA have lobbied so well.
Yes.
And ITBA
it's one thing having the phone number, it's another one when they actually answer.
Yeah, true.
Okay. Anybody else? Emma's got the mic. She's going around again.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much speaking to Minister Brown was going to help. He was on the late debate the night after it passed, and he took great pride in saying he didn't answer any emails, he wouldn't take any phone calls.
And he won't get re-elected.
Yeah, but it might be a little bit too late, but some other Fianna followers will and probably implement it. He took great pride in saying, and when I spoke to Aidan O'Brien about it in May, he was able to tell me he wouldn't take phone calls from some of the most powerful people in the country.
Anybody who votes for a political representative that isn't open to dialogue and hearing their concerns, that's what that's what you guys' job is to fight for your people.
I didn't realise the headwinds were so strong over the whole transport thing. I didn't even realise that was, and then to compound it by this gambling bill, I just think it's completely stupid.
Okay.
Yeah, because all the smart money says it's going to devastate the industry. I have no interest in gambling, not affiliated to anyone.
But now we have to play the cards we're dealt. So.
Well.
I know. Yeah.
I know, and I know you would have wrote about it, Jane, long time ago. I think it was back January, February. But I think tough times ahead. Tough times ahead.
Hopefully the right people in place. Morris, did you have your hands up?
I might have the solution.
Good man.
We're all ears.
My suggestion would be that the 3 panellists tonight, plus probably the moderator, would form a little party, an equine party, and we've used you as the lobbyist going forward. There are a lot of things there that we've taken out tonight. I think the buzzword, probably Jane, is your word, is social licence. I think that's down to us that we take that up and we take that on board. I do know that we'll be here at the sales next week and over the next couple of months at all the sales. And every barn we will turn, or every time we go into the bar, or every time we go into the restaurant here and in Newmarket, I never knew that was going on. I never knew this was going on. I never knew. And that's our fault. We're trying, through Kathy and through our own various lobby groups, to keep people informed. But people go out of their way not to be informed, in my opinion. And I think you couldn't be at enough things like this. The sad part is that there isn't 1,000 people here tonight, not 100 people, to hear a frank, honest, open view of to how things go on at that level. Some of us are exposed to it and we see it on a day-to-day level because we're involved with the various groups, but others don't get to see that. And it frightened me, Nina, when you said that the 2 commissioners would be so stark and so abhorred by you bringing forward something that it's a multi-billion-pound industry that we represent, right? It probably would go pro rata on par with the movement of horses for slaughter. There would probably be a bigger industry if it'd be known. And yet we're demoralised down into the pits and the dredges. And I think that's awful. Just one last piece on Mr. Brown, and just that piece with regard to the legislation. He wasn't for listening, and I think there was a little bit of political stuff went on regarding it wasn't seen as kosher to have any opinion. There were lots of people in the sidelines had an opinion on that particular, and it only needed a small bit of derogation to allow this to go on and to being very, very acceptable to the industry, and that didn't happen because of a certain amount of, I don't want to bring it down, I wanted to keep it up. I would go back in to say that I think if we all engaged a little bit more, listen to what's going on. I know you say we're bombarded with stuff from all over, but we do need to listen what's going on and see how important that this, especially this transport legislation, this could shut down our industry, guys. This could shut down our industry. And it'll be too late when everybody will be out there. What the fuck are HRI doing? What the fuck are ITBA doing? What is all these organisations? Des and Joe are given lifetimes, 3 lifetimes, to fighting for us out in Europe and everywhere else. And little thanks for it, you know what I mean? I think you couldn't praise them enough for what they do. And equally so, I would like to finish up with saying thank you very much to the panel. I thought that they give a very frank and honest display there tonight. Thank you very much.
Well done. Yeah, well said. I would like to conclude by saying, look, you know, there is a very reasonable crowd here. I'm with you, Maurice. I wish we filled the auditorium in Goffs. I would say it is our duty now to pass the message along to everybody who wasn't here, and to do it in an informed and accurate way. The biggest mistake, and if anybody, there's an election next Tuesday, if anybody didn't know about that, and he got into office 8 years ago when he started to lie to a lot of people, and a lot of people believed him. People believe what they see in a 7-second video on Twitter, or they believe what they choose to believe. Proper, accurate information, and that's what needs to be translated from here tonight, and that's one of the biggest lessons I think we've learned over the last couple of years. Thank you again, each and every one of you, for being with us tonight. We really appreciate it, and thank you all for your attention. It was really appreciated.